Namaste and greetings. I, Priyanshi Arora, a researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti, Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to all of you to the IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered for a special talk on Prospects for Energy Cooperation in South Asia by Srinivas Krishnaswamy sir, as a part of the series, The State of Environment, #Planet Talks, organized by IMPRI, Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development. Our speaker for today is Sir Srinivas Krishnaswamy. Srinivas sir is an economist by training and is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Vasudha Foundation, a not-for-profit think tank, CSO, set up by him in April 2010 and working in the clean energy and climate policy space. Mr. Krishnamurthy has been actively involved in conceptualizing and designing a number of pioneering and unique projects in the space of clean energy and climate policy. Sir designed the first and only multi-stakeholder and source-agnostic platform for renewable energy in India, called the Indian Renewable Energy Federation. Srinivas sir also headed the policy unit of Greenpeace in India, and prior to that was the head of climate and energy campaign of Greenpeace in India. Sir has also been actively engaged and following the climate negotiations in the capacity of a civil society observer status. We welcome you, sir. Our discussants for today are Professor Christopher Scott, Udisha Saklani ma'am, and Dr. Mirza Sadaqat Huda. Professor Christopher Scott is the Maurice K. Goddard Chair of Forestry and Environmental Resource Conservation and a professor in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management at Pennsylvania State University, America. We welcome you, sir. Udisha Saklani ma'am is a PhD researcher in the Department of Geography at University of Cambridge, England. We welcome you, ma'am. Dr. Mirza Sadaqat Huda is a postdoctoral research fellow at OSCE Academy in Kyrgyzstan and Asia Edge Fellow at the National Bureau of Asian Research in Washington, D.C. Sir is also a non-resident fellow at Energy Peace Partners in California. We welcome you, sir. The moderator for today's session is Dr. Simi Mehta, the CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI. I would now like to hand over to Dr. Simi Mehta to convene the session, and we look forward to learning from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanshi, and good evening to everyone from India. So we all know that South Asia is one of the leading consumers of energy, and hydrocarbon accounts for a predominant share of its energy mix. The countries are neither richly endowed with hydrocarbons, nor are evenly bestowed with natural resources and production capabilities. So a consequence to the growing economies of the South Asia has been the creation of structural environment of a region which is deficit in energy. These countries are therefore meeting most of their energy demands from imports. According to the latest available data from the World Bank, it said that there is about 25% of import dependency in Bhutan and about 17% in the case of Nepal. But in larger countries like India and Bangladesh, it is more than 80% of their hydrocarbon demand. So clearly the complementarities in the energy demand, the vulnerability to the fluctuations in the global market, and also the uneven resource endowments underscores the very need to cooperate and to achieve regional energy security. So to discuss the prospects of energy cooperation in South Asia, we are privileged to be joined by Mr. Srinivas Krishnaswamy, along with eminent discussants, Dr. Mirza, Professor Scott, and Ms. Udisha. We look forward to an enriching discussion. I yield the floor to Mr. Srinivas.
Thank you, Simi, and a very good afternoon all. I will just share my screen. I'm not sure if my screen is visible. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet. Yes. Yes. Yeah, you could go full screen.
Yeah, I will do.
Sure.
So once again, thank you, Simi, and a very good afternoon to all of you. My presentation is basically while it talks of areas of energy cooperation. What I've done is I have sort of made my presentation into two broad compartments. One compartment largely would be on setting the context, which basically presents the energy and emission landscape in South Asia. That is more to set the context. And the second set of slides would be on the recommendations and on energy cooperation. And it also dwells a little into areas that or bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral arrangements or agreements that are already in place, and also on the benefits of taking this forward. So without much ado, let me sort of start off with my presentation. Now, just to give you a very quick landscape of the global the global 1.5 degree Celsius temperature rise, where do countries stand? As per the Climate Action Tracker's recent analysis, even today, all the pledges and targets that have come by way of NDCs and also by way of enhanced NDCs still would lead to a temperature rise of 2.4 to 3 degrees Celsius. So we are still nowhere near what is required by countries to bring temperature levels to 1.5 or temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this, by 2100. So this is where we stand. And if you look at the Climate Action Tracker's very, very recent analysis, it says that no country in South Asia, with the exception of perhaps Nepal, Bhutan, and India, no country in South Asia is 1.5 degrees C compatible in terms of their policies, NDCs, and so on. And if at all any country is 2 degrees C, it is perhaps Nepal, Bhutan, and to some extent India. Now, again, there are some mixed reactions as far as India is concerned. The earlier analysis of the Climate Action Tracker actually put India as 2 degrees C compatible, whereas the more recent one that was released a couple of weeks back says that it is insufficient. Nevertheless, I suppose one could debate on that. But I just wanted to set this, put this up to set the context. Now, let's look at the carbon footprint. If we are saying that South Asia is nowhere near, being 2 degrees C or 1.5 degrees C compatible, why is it so? So if you look at the carbon footprint on especially the energy sector of South Asia, you would find that most of these countries, the predominant source of energy is, or if you look at the GHG footprint, you would see that energy sector contributes maximum to the GHG emissions of all these countries. Now, the absolute numbers will vary, it may not be very huge, but nevertheless, you find that in case of Afghanistan, 80% of the emissions from the greenhouse gas emissions of Afghanistan is from the energy. Similarly, Bangladesh is about 39%, though agriculture plays a major role. Pakistan is about 48%. Sri Lanka is about 64%. Nepal is about 43%. Maldives is 60%. Bhutan is 59%, including Bhutan. And of course, India is 78%. Now, if you deep dive into this, into the energy, with the exception of a few countries, and I'll go back to the previous slides, in the case of Afghanistan, it is largely energy for power. In Bangladesh, again, it is energy for power. Pakistan, again, it is energy for power. And then Sri Lanka is energy for power. In the case of Bhutan, it's largely transportation because they do not contribute, their energy sector does not contribute to emissions at all because it's largely hydro. So it's largely transportation. Maldives, again, is gasoline and petroleum products. And so the bulk of the 60% actually, even in Maldives, is from the energy sector. Nepal is again mixed because of the large share of hydro. And India, out of the 78%, if I had to give you a split up, 50-odd% is from coal, which is your public electricity generation, and about the remaining is from the transportation, with some amount of emissions from the industrial energy. So to put it in perspective, you would find that the energy emissions is the largest amongst almost all of the countries of South Asia, with the exception of perhaps Bangladesh. The energy sector is one of the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And within the energy sector, It is energy for producing, or the emissions are largely from electricity generation, whether it is coal, oil and gas, petroleum products, so on and so forth, gasoline and so on. Now, again, let's talk about the energy mix in South Asian countries. So, so this is again, just to add to the context, India, you would say 55% of India's electricity power capacity is from coal. It has come down. If I were to make this presentation 3 years back, I would have said 60 odd percent, 68%. It's come down to 55, largely because we've had a fairly large penetration of solar and wind, 100 gigawatts of solar and renewable energy capacity as on date, which is a phenomenal achievement. But nevertheless, we still have a long way to go. 55% of India's power still comes from coal. And Nepal, like I said, it's largely oil and gas plays a very minor role. Solar, again, a very minor role. It's largely hydro. So that's why I was saying when I said about the greenhouse gas profile of Nepal, it's largely transportation. Pakistan, again, if you look at Pakistan, again, you'll find oil and gas playing a very major role, and so is coal, with solar and wind, very, very minuscule sort of percentage in terms of their share in the overall installed capacity energy mix. Sri Lanka, again, is sort of coal and oil and gas almost 50%, with hydro, again, playing a fairly major role of 34%. But again, if you look at this wedge of coal and oil and gas, it's fairly large. Bangladesh, again, large component is oil and gas. Afghanistan, oil and gas again, and so is the case of Nepal. So is the case of Maldives. And Bhutan, of course, is the cleanest of all, largely because much of its electricity comes from hydro, right? So this is sort of sets the context as to why or what is the emission profile of these countries if you look at the sources of power. Now, but having said that, and despite the fact that you find that coal plays a very, very major role in coal, oil and gas, I would say fossil fuel. I would put that all in the bracket of fossil fuel plays a very major role amongst most countries in South Asia, with the exception of Bhutan and Nepal. Is the per capita consumption really high? No, it is not. Now, if you look at the per capita electricity consumption of most countries, it's way below the global average. Even Bhutan, which has a fairly high per capita emission of electricity consumption of 2830 kilowatt hours, is slightly less than the global average, but can compare to the global average about 3152 kilowatt hours. Which means that in a lot of these countries, it's not necessary that development and high per capita electricity consumption should go hand in hand. It's not necessarily so, but nevertheless, it also gives an indication of the kind of level of development that these countries still have to, go. And so this is where you find the per capita electricity consumption. Sri Lanka is about 742, Pakistan 418, all well below, well below the global average. Nepal is just 10% of the global, or less than 10% of the global average. So this is where we are. This gives you a picture where we are. And the countries that are really low are Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka to a certain extent, with India, Afghanistan, and Maldives slightly on the higher side, and Bhutan fairly good, or in comparison to all the other countries doing the best of the lot. Now, going to the next slide, I may not be able to. Okay. Now, so overview on when we look at the energy access, so you look at per capita, let's look at energy access. So according to the Sustainable Energy for All analysis estimates, there are close to 152 million people in South Asia who lack access to electricity, and close to 900 million who lack access to clean cooking. Now, this situation has changed in the last few years, particularly in India, due to this huge push in the LPG for rural areas, but still, you would still say 900 million And bulk of the 900 million clean cooking is across the South Asia, with the exception of Maldives. And when you look at electricity, no access to electricity, Pakistan and Bangladesh top the list of people having no access to electricity. I just wanted to make a point here that while India at one point in time had a large population, we did not have access to electricity. In the last 5 years, we have ensured, at least that's what the official records say, that we have 100% electrification of all villages and close to 90% electrification of all households. And we should be aiming for a 24/7 electricity by 2022. This is just to set the context. So in a nutshell, if I have to put all of this in 4 or 5 quick points, what are they? Number one, like I said earlier, the energy sector is the largest contributor to GHG emissions across all South Asian countries, with the exception of Nepal and Bhutan. Dominance of fossil fuel to meet its electricity and energy requirements across all South Asian countries, again with the exception of Bhutan and Nepal. Per capita, low per capita electricity consumption again. Access to clean, affordable, and sustainable electricity continues to be a burning issue in most South Asian countries. And you can also add clean, affordable, and energy access for heating and cooking also seems to be a burning issue. And this is cutting across all countries of South Asia, with the exception of Maldives. On the positive side, now not everything is negative, but on the positive side, you will also see that this region is blessed with a very, very huge renewable energy and non-fossil fuel potential, which can be tapped. However, the pace of RE technology development and deployment across South Asian countries is not the same, is not kept the same pace, number one. And number two, related to it, so also in terms of the cost. The huge decline in the cost of solar in India, like from 6 rupees a kilowatt hour in 2015 to 2 rupees a kilowatt hour, or even lesser, 1.99 a kilowatt hour in 2021. No other country in South Asia has seen such a huge decline in the prices of solar generation. But that could also be attributed to scale to a large extent, because we've from a few kilowatt install capacity, or maybe in the early megawatt install capacity in 2012, 2013, we have now close to about 40 odd gigawatts of solar alone, and close to about 100 gigawatts of renewables put together, all sources put together of renewables. Now, okay, we were talking of renewable energy potential. Now, this gives you a snapshot of some of these numbers, and a lot of these numbers are very preliminary estimates, and it only looks at hydro. I would like to make a point here, a caveat here, that when I say renewables, I also look at renewable plus, which includes hydro, because for India, large hydro is still not part of renewables in that sense, but I would like to sort of call it renewables plus, which includes large hydro. So you will see that this snapshot, I'm not going to read into each of these numbers, but what it clearly shows is that there is a huge potential. And please bear in mind that I have not even touched on hydrogen here, which again is not something that estimates are already there on in terms of potential. I've not touched on the issue of tidal and wave power, which is again huge. And even in the case of geothermal, it's only Afghanistan that has got some estimates, which could be much higher than this. And I believe Sri Lanka also has got a huge potential for geothermal. And of course, tidal energy and wave energy, given the fact that South Asia has got roughly about 11,000, 12,000 kilometers of coastline, with India alone having 7,500 odd, Sri Lanka about 1,340 odd, and then Bangladesh 580 odd, Pakistan 990, and so on and so forth. Maldives about 650 odd. So you're looking at roughly 11,000, 12,000 kilometers of coastline. That's also another area that one should be looking at. And of course, offshore wind is, again, we have not taken that into consideration. But then, of course, when I say wind potential, these are all onshore wind and not offshore wind. But to cut the long story short, collectively, South Asia can easily ensure 100% RE. A lot of countries, and most of these countries have enough, like for instance, Bhutan. If you just take the 260,000 megawatts of hydro potential, it is 8x or 9x more than what Bhutan would need to meet its entire power requirement, even with the high per capita, and even if the per capita electricity consumption shoots up much higher and reaches or crosses the global average, there will still be enough electricity that country can generate that can be sent or exported to other countries. So this would give you a nutshell. Again, Afghanistan, 220,000 megawatts of solar potential. That's again pretty huge for a country that's pretty small. So this gives you a snapshot. So coming to the next bucket, having sort of covered the broad compartment of setting the context. Now, coming to the energy cooperation, I've just put it into three buckets. Technical cooperation, which is more in terms of know-how, sharing our experiences, best practices, and so on. So here I would say, and the list can be, you could have a laundry list, but I just wanted to cover 3 or 4 broad aspects of this. One is in this whole area, there's a whole lot of experience, in terms of on various fronts, whether it's the renewable energy scale-up front, whether it is on the energy access front, or whether it's in terms of R&D front, and so on. So, and then there is also policy framework that these countries have experienced, and so this is something that they could be sharing with other South Asian countries as to how certain practices, how did it lead to or did not lead to scale up on renewable energy. For example, in India, one could look at the feed-in tariff, one could look at the renewable purchase obligations. There are a whole lot of these experiences that may or may not be practiced in other countries in South Asia, but which could be adopted or adapted, not necessarily adopted as this, but adapted for their country's requirements or what is appropriate in those countries. So I would say sharing of best practices and experiences, a compendium of good policies, and a lot of states, even within India, a lot of states have put in place very good practices. Now, that itself needs to be shared with other countries, maybe other states within India, but other countries as well. Then there's this whole capacity building and training programs. How do you build capacities of electricity utilities in other countries? A lot of them, for example, may not have the kind of experiences that our electricity utilities have, the Discoms have, in scaling up renewables or in purchasing renewables and so on. So that could be another area, and training on new technologies. I'll pack that training on new technologies for a bit and come to it a little later. And then coming to the next bucket, which is technology cooperation. Joint R&D on new technologies. For example, this entire tidal and wave energy. There's no, to the best of my knowledge, there are hardly many pilots here, and we need to have pilots, and this could be done across the South Asia space. Then there's this hydrogen technology, or hydrogen, the green hydrogen, so to speak. So can there be any joint R&D technologies or sharing of technologies across these countries? And of course, sharing of patents for new technologies. Storage is another area where, again, India, you would see that storage technologies have matured to a certain extent. The prices have come down from sub 10 plus to about 6 plus rupees, 6 plus a kilowatt hour. So the prices are falling, and it's going to fall further. So that's another area. And the third one is this entire bucket, which I would say is that green energy, cross-border trade, and regional grid, where you maximize RE and non-fossil fuel potentials. So this would be the large area, I would say. One can delve deep and come up with a lot of pointers, but I'll just sort of give you the big ticket sort of areas of cooperation. Now, okay. Now, South Asia Energy Cooperation, a little bit of a historical perspective. It's not that we've not had historic energy cooperations at all. We have had a lot of bilateral, quadrilateral, trilateral energy cooperation. The biggest sort of I would say bilateral cooperation is between India and Bhutan. A lot of hydropower plants, maybe 5, 6 of them, have been built in Bhutan with Indian technology or India, and the power generated, bulk of the power generated from these hydroelectricity electric plants have been exported to India. So you have it, and this gives you a perspective in terms of the kind of energy alone. There have been 15 projects at 2.85 billion US dollars, the total cost of these projects. And this is, but one thing that I would want to point out, and that's the reason why I put this slide here, if you look at some of these bilateral agreements, bulk of it, with the exception of the Indo-Bhutan, which is largely hydro, and Nepal, which is largely hydro. In other countries, it's either LNG or it is coal-fired power plant. Can we get away from coal and do more solar, like the 150 megawatt solar power plant in Komali? Now, what are the challenges? But having said that, when we say energy cooperation, is it a bed of roses? Is it all easy, or is there other issues that one will have to factor in? So what are the challenges to energy cooperation? As we all know, and I'm not going to dwell deep into this, but geopolitical situation and dynamics is a major, major issue. Not all the countries are friends. There are, what shall I say, compulsions, certain kind of compulsions. Current situation in certain countries are not conducive for any sort of a cooperation. And of course, even if you look at if you want to draw pipelines, for instance, or if you want to have regional grid, and then again, the geopolitical situation dynamics would come in the way. Because of that, there's a reluctance in political will. Political leaders have tried to address it, but again, there's a reluctance because of that. And that has led to a lack of follow through on very ambitious resolutions made in these SAARC forums. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, many of these SAARC forums, earlier the SAARC summits, the South Asia regional cooperation summits used to happen at regular intervals, but now it's quite some time since we had such meetings. And then there are other external dynamics, like, for instance, the China factor, which I will not delve into. But having said that, if at all we need this, what would be the overarching objective of such regional cooperation? One, as I said earlier, and I take you back to the slide one, South Asia is not doing extremely well on addressing climate or keeping temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, despite the fact that both Bhutan and Nepal, bulk of their energy comes from hydro, but despite that, they're not, none of these countries are actually 1.5 degrees C compatible and not compliant, nor are the policies anywhere near that. So one is, but then coming back to the earlier slides where I said there's a huge potential for renewables and non-fossil fuel, they can easily be 1.5 degrees C compliant. Leave alone being 1.5 degree compliant, they can definitely decarbonize the power sector or the energy sector. That's a low-hanging fruit given the kind of potential. So which brings to the next point, was the energy sector decarbonization, where the energy sector decarbonization would be possible by maximizing RE potential in each of these countries. Like I said, there are these new technologies like hydrogen, and then India, of course, is giving a huge boost to hydrogen. Can they share this with other countries too? And then I was talking of tidal energy and the geothermal and so on. And more importantly, and this is something a lot of people tend to miss out, is that having a regional grid would also help in managing regional energy load balance. Basically, here what I mean to say is that there are these seasonal complementarity in electricity load, both generation as well as demand. Just to put it in perspective, in certain areas, because of the seasonal variation or winters being more severe, there being more requirement for cooling, heating load. In some places, more requirement for cooling load and so on. And in other places, when there's a more requirement for cooling load, there may not be that requirement in other parts of South Asia. So how can you balance this and ensure that you don't need to add generation capacities rampantly, but are just sufficient that can manage this load and ensure that you reduce your expenditure by not really maximizing on generation capacities, but also do this very clever load balance. I'll stop here, but then there are a couple of sites that I wanted to sort of refer to. One is we have set up a very detailed power sector data portal, which is called the vasudapower.in, where you can get a lot of information. Right now it's India specific, but there is also another platform that is the GSG Platform India. And the GSG Platform India is, again, one of our unique civil society platform that was set up to estimate greenhouse gases in India. It has 6 civil society organizations. We are the secretariat. Vasudha Foundation is the secretariat, and we manage the entire project. The other organizations or civil society groups include CEW, CSTEP, ICLE South Asia, WRI, amongst others. And both these sites, you can get all the data. Everything is out in public domain, easy access, no paywalls. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for such a comprehensive presentation. And it definitely, you could end the slideshow. Yes. So it definitely provides a lot of information about the status in which the South Asian countries are in terms of their energy mix and where the prospects are. So I would now invite Ms. Udisha Saklani, who is joining us from Cambridge, United Kingdom, to share her views on the presentation and also on her work in the area. Yeah. Udisha, over to you.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. First of all, this was an extremely comprehensive presentation, and thank you very much. So just to give you a context of where I come from, so that some of the questions that I raise or some of the remarks that I make can be set in context. So my PhD actually looks at hydropower cooperation initiatives, and I specifically look at bilateral cooperation between India, Bhutan, India, Nepal in the field of hydropower to see how are these new projects being designed, planned, as well as implemented. Who are the actors? What are the kind of discourses and developmental imaginaries that are driving energy cooperation initiatives. So I'm specifically looking at the Adun 3 dam in Nepal, which is being funded as well as implemented by an Indian public sector company. So I think the case for a renewable energy transition in South Asia has been fairly strongly established. I think countries across the region agree that there is a need, given that climate change impacts the region tremendously. There is a need for us to move away from fossil fuels. But I think what is important for us is to think about how just will this transition be. And by that, I mean that not only thinking about a switch in terms of, so not just thinking about issues of resettlement, gender-related problems when it comes to planning large renewable energy projects such as dams, but also thinking about job losses, livelihoods. How are we going to create new jobs in a sector that is still evolving? Because moving away from coal means that we are taking away the revenue that is generated from it, the taxes, the dividends, as well as the jobs which exist in the mining sector. So thinking more deeply about the fact that theoretically the case for a renewable energy transition is absolutely true, but how does it actually play out? And for that, we need to ensure that we have the right institutions, the right policies, as well as the political will to make sure that all segments of the South Asian population move together and benefit from this particular transition. Interestingly, when I was in Nepal, I was asking a lot of these actors that are actually playing a role in deciding how these energy cooperation agreements are going to be signed. And from a layman point of view, geopolitics and domestic politics ends up hijacking the entire conversation every single time. I almost feel like there are two sets of people. One is occupied by the technocrats that are talking numbers and are talking statistics and are trying to make a case for renewable energy for transition. And then the other group comprises activists and bureaucrats that are constantly talking about the political problems that get in the way. Interestingly, the actors who are actually successfully managing to push for these projects have an interesting take, and they say that geopolitics, that your geography cannot be controlled, it cannot be changed, so why talk about it in the first place? It's important for us to keep in mind that we try and look at any window of opportunity and try and kind of capitalize on those things. However, questions such as technology transfer, so for instance, thinking about where the money for new technology comes from, right? And that requires a combination of not just international funding institutions, but also national governments that should be willing to spend more money on research and development so that more technologies can be used. And I think this is particularly in the case of the pandemic, where there has been a drastic impact on imports, and sort of countries have realized that they might have to increasingly rely on domestic suppliers, domestic contractors, as well as materials. So it's important for us, when we talk about energy cooperation, to bring in these issues of technology transfer, to think more deeply about what are the social environmental impacts of these large projects that are in place. For instance, in the case of Nepal, from what I understand, there is no regional environmental impact assessment norm which is in place. So Nepal, in some sense, heavily relies on the IFC standard, but the region has its own context. I think it's important for national governments to come together and to decide what are the sort of norms that have to be in place, particularly given South Asian region's history. It is very, very there are layers of conflicts which are there in place already. So how can we ensure that the past mistakes are not repeated? So those are just some of the things that I was thinking about. And one last point that I would want to raise here is the issue of domestic consensus. So I think one way that energy cooperation in some sense has failed is the fact that I don't think there are enough communication frameworks in place or processes to make sure that people understand why energy cooperation is important in the region, why particular projects need to be implemented, what are some of the costs and the benefits of that. Of course, there is the SAARC Energy Center, there are all sorts of the BBIN initiative, there is BIMSTEC. But what are these high-level meetings actually? What are the discussions going on at that level? Are we able to translate those talking points and those decisions into language that people on the ground can actually understand? Because they are the ones who are the first point of impact. And if they don't understand, then there won't be enough consensus in place, which is required. And already a region which is where the integration is so low, I think increasingly there's not going to be much success in actually implementing programs that need to be in place. So these are just some of my initial comments, and yeah, I am excited to hear what the other two people have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Disha. Thank you for your comments. I would invite Professor Scott to share his remarks. Sir, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. First, I appreciate IMPRI holding policy forums of this kind. I think the topic that we're here discussing is both salient and, as has been pointed out by the speaker, Mr. Krishnaswamy, very timely. We should lose no time in addressing these topics. We all understand the critical importance, both from the compliance with NDC targets, but also I think critically, as Disha has just pointed out, the very real and important development challenges associated with energy provision in a sustainable manner across the region. So congratulations in the first instance to IMPRI. Second, I think Mr. Krishnaswamy has put forward some very compelling views and a case based on data. Myself having come from a science for policy background, it's refreshing, but also I think challenging to hear a talk that is so well grounded in the data. You could envision participating in a panel like this where there's hand waving that these are the challenges and these are the ways forward and so forth, but without actually grounding it in the research and the science. So on that score, I think Mr. Krishnaswamy is to be commended. Let me take a couple of his remarks and try to see if I can expand on them a little bit. Being in a sense constructively critical, I think that's the challenge of a panelist in this fashion, is to take up some of the main points, but see if there's some way we can probe them a bit further, and then possibly have an extended discussion, including among the other panel members, but with the audience, such as we'll get the Q&A remarks and have a chance to reflect on those. Coming to the, so I'm very interested to see the broad brush strokes of the carbon picture in South Asia with the updated data. I've referred to that. Thank you very much, Mr. Krishnaswamy, for putting that out so coherently and so systematically across the different countries of the region. Now, coming to what you've referred to as the second bucket, in other words, what are the prospects for cooperation to address both the carbon challenge, but also this development need? You've put forward technical, technology, and regional grid. I actually would put all three of those in one bucket, which would be technical and technocratic types of cooperation. I think the more compelling need is this political and institutional dynamic among the countries. And you've referred to it, so I'm not saying you've in any fashion omitted that, but I think that is where we could also focus some of our remarks. Now, coming to both technical options for RE transition and adoptions moving from fossil fuels into clean renewables, I do think that the grid option that you've presented, and that there are numerous examples of bilateral connections among the countries and some degree of joining of national grids in locations, bears some further, let's say, emphasis, not only in the diplomatic and bilateral types of discussions, but also to show technical feasibility of those connections. I think that the political economy questions that we're all realizing are a great challenge for the region, in some senses can be addressed or mitigated, or the first steps in that direction can be taken by showing some low-hanging fruit, which could be in these grid connections that we find. Now, that alone could present the opportunity that simply we're distributing individual countries' carbon challenges across the region by simply having a grid connections that would even out those carbon impacts. And in no fashion then does the South Asia region reach any of the renewable targets, I think, that we're looking to better understand. So how would grid connections, but also technical cooperation, lead to greater renewable energy adoption? I think some of your slides, Mr. Krishnaswamy, showing the great RE potential were very significant. Those I would characterize as being technical potential estimates. And as we've seen in hydropower, with this notion between gap, which is actual accomplishment or installation of installed hydropower generation compared to technical potential, that gap itself, I think, is a little bit of a misnomer, or let's say it's an elusive target. To simply fill the gap, I think, is not what we're really looking to do. Now, I would like to home in on hydropower, and particularly because several countries in the region have excess capacity. We've seen how Bhutan, for instance, has both met its own domestic electricity consumption, but in a fashion that also is leading to exports, which are then helping other neighboring countries, and chiefly India, to meet some of its electrification targets. Now, there's lots of interesting analysis we could get into of benefits and beneficiaries, who wins, who loses in that. And I think those are salient points, but I don't want to immediately dwell on those. I think we need to take that as an example of the type of cooperation that could lead to a regional grid and grid interconnections as aiding in those two, carbon mitigation and sustainable development challenges across the region. The reason I'm focusing on hydropower is right now still the installed capacity of renewables, considering both small hydropower and sustainable hydropower, and also some of the larger hydropower installations across the region, still are where the non-fossils give us the greatest actually installed generation capacity. So again, I'm not trying to say we shouldn't be pursuing wind and solar. We should be doing that urgently and fervently. But I think the hydropower sector is where we actually right now, and in at least the coming decade, have the greatest potential to pursue those types of challenges. Now, I'd refer to some very interesting work, which is being conducted by ICIMAD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, Kathmandu, but of which all the countries of the region, with the exception of course, Maldives and Sri Lanka, are members. In other words, all of the Himalayan region countries, but also including Bangladesh is a member. ICIMAD has done some very interesting work in this regard. I had actually requested that Dr. Ramesh Vaidya be invited to this. He was unfortunately unable to attend it because he has some other conflicting schedule today. But some very interesting work has been done by ICIMAD and looking at both potential across the region, but also point-to-point contact, country-to-country contact, the whole bilateral question versus a more trilateral, quadrilateral, multilateral types of approaches to grid integration around hydropower. Second, I think we also have to look at some broader questions, and there's some interesting work that has come out in a recent paper, just actually in 2021, by Muntasir Murshed in Bangladesh, which looks actually at how renewables emerge from a broader sectoral multi-source generation econometric analysis using some panel data. As an economist, Mr. Krishnaswamy, I think this would be of interest to you. It is a modeling study, but it does some really interesting work, I think, looking at how renewables emerge as the technology and the generation source of primary interest when you look at grid integration in regional energy markets. So we haven't spoken about the market question yet, but I think there are also some interesting ways in which regulated regional markets can drive some of the technology solutions, and hopefully then, as I referred to earlier, being the low-hanging fruit, then provide some pathways forward for what appears to be an insurmountable obstacle in the diplomatic and the broader political economy types of discussion, which again, Ms. Saklani Udisha has just referred to as being a primary point of contention in those sectoral mid-level, let's say, decision makers, ministry people, and so forth. Now, the third point that I would also like to refer to is, and you've mentioned it very briefly, Mr. Krishnaswamy, and perhaps we could get into some discussion, and I think you've referred to it as the China factor. One of the things I think that we all are, of course, cognizant about is the pace of both technology development, but also adoption of renewables in China. And of course, being in the headwaters region of that same Himalayan context that we referred to, Tibet and adjoining regions in Yunnan, in a sense, in my view, are part of South Asia region, though they may not be from a total country perspective defined in that way, just as you might say, well, South India, Tamil Nadu, or Karnataka, etc., are they part of that integration in the north? Well, through the grid connections, they may be. Now, I think my point is that the China factor should not be ignored. I think there are some important both opportunities there. I understand the obstacles, so I'm not suggesting that immediately China would either be a willing or country partners of the region would be interested in the initial instance of including China in these kinds of regional discussions. But I do think that the technology factor and some of the ways forward, and we'll reserve our remarks for that a little bit later, show some interesting potential in adjoining regions, less so of Tibet, but in Yunnan to our country regions to the east. So I'll end my remarks there saying that Mr. Krishnaswamy has put forward a very compelling view of the need. I think the challenge, both in your own remarks, but here's what we're discussing in the forum, is precisely those ways forward. And my suggestion is that we focus on some of the small steps, not looking for final solution types of solutions, which can seem overwhelming and very challenging, but look for some of those technical, technological, and grid interconnection, your three buckets, or let's say your 3 points in that bucket, as being the next step when you combine them, of course, with the mechanisms for actually achieving those. And those are something that Ms. Saklani has referred to in being some of the institutional dynamics, allowing for technical and technological cooperation to go forward. So I'll end my remarks there. Again, thank you. I'm interested to hear what Dr. Sadaqat Huda may have to offer to us, and then entering into a discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, sir. Dr. Mirza, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehta, and thank you very much, Professor Krishnaswamy, and also Udisha and Professor Scott for your very interesting comments. My background is on energy cooperation in South Asia, and currently I'm doing some work on energy cooperation between Central and South Asia through my employment at the OSCE, because the focus of that organization is on Central Asian region as well as broader Eurasia. So essentially, I would just like to divide my comments into 2 parts. Firstly, I'd like to concentrate on the eastern part of South Asia, so energy cooperation between Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. And then I would make some brief comments about energy cooperation in the western side of South Asia, so between the Central Asian countries and the South Asian countries. So I had the good fortune of doing some field work a couple of years back in India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And the focus of my field work was on the potential of cross-border regional projects, particularly hydroelectric projects. And so I'd just like to pick up on something Udisha mentioned regarding costs and benefits of hydroelectric projects. And I'd like to share with you guys some insights from my interviews. So when I interviewed policymakers in New Delhi, they were very excited about hydroelectric projects from Nepal and Bhutan. And this was the same for Bangladesh. And one of the things that was mentioned by one of the policymakers was that hydroelectricity is free and sustainable. So we should always prioritize hydroelectric cooperation. And when I spoke to policymakers in Nepal, they expressed a lot of concern regarding the impact of hydroelectric dams, particularly on the environment and also on the economy. So one of the issues that kept being mentioned by the Nepalese respondents was that Nepal only has 17% flat land. And if some of this land gets flooded, then the country that is exporting the electricity should compensate them. And because of gravity, the water ultimately flows downwards, carrying with it the alluvial minerals and all the good ingredients you need for quality agriculture, and this would flow down to India. So the Nepali policymakers feel that they are being they're facing costs twice. They're facing the floods, and they're missing out on any kind of positive impact on agriculture. And so far, Bangladesh and Nepal, Bangladesh and India has not entered into any agreements regarding compensating Nepal for all the costs of hydroelectric dams on the environment. So the perception gap between the countries that are exporting the electricity and those that are importing it regarding the costs and benefits of hydroelectricity is something that can really undermine these projects going forward. I also appreciate Professor Krishnaswamy's suggestion that we should focus on renewable energy when it comes to energy cooperation in South Asia and not coal. And this is one of the sticking points of, say, the India-Bangladesh relations So currently, a coal power plant is being developed in the Sundarbans, which is the largest mangrove forest in the world. And this is being developed in the Bangladesh side of the Sundarbans. So the Sundarbans is a mangrove forest shared by Bangladesh and India. And currently, the Rampal power plant, which is a coal-fired power plant, is being developed in the Bangladesh side of the Sundarban forest with Indian assistance. And this has obviously raised a lot of concerns among environmentalists, not just in Bangladesh, but also India. So when it comes to energy cooperation, it is best to perhaps avoid projects that undermine the environment and also, regional cohesion. On the western side of South Asia, we have quite a few projects being developed between Central Asian countries such as Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. So one of them is the TAPI pipeline, which is the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. It was inaugurated a couple of years back. And of course, because of the incident in August 2021, when the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan, there is a lot of controversy around whether the TAPI is actually going to go through. The issue that is often missed by geopolitical commentators on the TAPI is that Turkmenistan has always mentioned a very good relationship with the Taliban. Subsequent Turkmen regimes have, have established very good relationships with the Taliban, with the Taliban, even when the U.S. Supported administration was in power in Kabul. Turkmenistan making good relationships with the Taliban regime, and as a result, the spokesman of Taliban, Shuhain, I think his name is Suhail Shaheen, recently in an interview mentioned that the Taliban will support the TAPI pipeline going forward. But of course, this raises the question of ethics and legitimacy. I mean, the TAPI pipeline will provide an enormous amount of revenue to the Taliban government. So the South Asian countries need to consider very carefully whether it would be ethical to go forward with the TAPI pipeline, considering that the Afghan regime has not gained international legitimacy and questionable conduct on human rights. Some other projects that are being considered between Central Asia and South Asia are the CASA 1000 project and the TUTAP project. So the CASA 1000 project envisions the transfer of hydroelectricity from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Afghanistan and Pakistan. These countries, as you know, don't have a very good relationship with each other or a very consistent relationship. The focus of this project is to actually transfer hydroelectricity, which would mean Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan need to come together and come to an agreement on how they share their water. And as recent as April 2020, there was a violent conflict at the Kyrgyz-Tajik border. And this conflict was actually instigated by a shared water facility. So when it comes to large-scale hydroelectric projects, including multiple countries of Central Asia, there could be some serious issues around historical conflicts around water. The other project that is being developed is the TUTAP project. So this is, once again, a hydroelectric project between Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And the objective, once again, is to transfer excess hydroelectricity from Central Asian countries to South Asia. And in Afghanistan, there has been several controversies regarding the actual route of the TUTAP. So the Hazara community, which is a minority in Afghanistan, have protested about being left out of some of the benefits of these TUTAP projects. So once again, you have the ethnic issue being entangled with transnational regional cooperation. And in regard to Professor Christopher Scott's comments on regional grid integration, and also Professor Krishnaswamy's emphasis on grid integration, I just wanted to mention that energy transition is not free from geopolitics. So there's all this sort of comments being made about critical minerals, about cybersecurity of energy transition, because as we move towards renewable energy, electricity grids will become more digitalized. And some people fear that leaves these grids open to cyber attacks. Some of these comments surely are hyperbolic, but perceptions are very important when it comes to international relations and regional cooperation. So perhaps one of the issues that we should consider discussing is how can we ensure that the geopolitics of renewable energy are not as cumbersome as the geopolitics of traditional energy. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would invite Mr. Srinivas to respond to the discussant points that have been raised. I think very, very pertinent. And if you could respond to them, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
As I also said, thank you so much for those wonderful comments, and I'll try and address them not in any order if I'm permitted to do so. First of all, first and foremost, to the point on getting a political will for a renewable energy transition, I would like to point out that with the exception of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and India, all the other countries, whether it's Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Maldives, are part of what is called as a Climate Vulnerability Forum. Now, the CVF, as it is very popularly called, has been at the forefront of pushing for countries across the globe to adopt a path that can be 1.5 degrees C temperature rise compliant, right? And all of them have been, and if I'm not mistaken, Maldives for quite some time was the president of the CVF forum. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was right now with Philippines, and I think the current presidency, or likely to be the presidency, is Bangladesh. And the Bangladesh Prime Minister has been pushing hard for countries to come up with, update their NDCs, etc., and come up with a long-term mitigation pathway, a long-term mitigation strategy, and LTMS. So these countries, or at least the political leadership, is aware of the fact that countries, especially energy being the key contributor to GHG emissions, that will have to be one area that will have to be addressed across the region. And so I think that's where that is one issue which is fairly well known, and particularly Maldives has been, again, they've been doing a whole lot of issues, including underwater, cabinet meeting and so on and so forth, to sort of drive home that point. Now, I completely agree with you, Yudhisha, that, and we are doing that in India as well, that the issue of just transition is super important. But again, I would like to point out that if you actually look at just transition, now it is India which is actually in the region that actually has a maximum number of coal mines. Okay, and there are about 7 odd states that have large coaling: Jharkhand, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, parts of Maharashtra, etc., that have large coal mining area. And India is also the home for the largest number of coal-fired power plants. We have close to about 205 gigawatts of installed capacity of coal-fired power plant. Now, so just transition would play a very, very major role in a country like India. In other countries, where the energy situation is still growing, I'm not saying that just transition need not be addressed, but then they are building up their energy infrastructure, and why not leapfrog from, instead of going in for the coal-dominated to a renewable energy dominated energy pathway is what I'm saying. Now, so that, and then now talking of, and then again, I'm sorry, it's not in any order, but Professor Scott's point that, the first very step is institutional and political dynamics. Again, I would like to drive home the fact that a lot of these countries, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Maldives, understand the need to mitigate GHG emissions and keep temperature right under 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, in addition to that, there has been an institutional framework that was set up way back in the 1950s or 60s in what is called, I don't remember exactly, the Bangladesh Agreement, the Dhaka Agreement, where they've looked at energy cooperation. But unfortunately, what has happened is the political dynamics, largely the India-Pakistan, the China-Pakistan, that seems to have come in the way of fostering energy cooperation as a region, for South Asia region as a whole. And that requires, I'm not sure if we as civil society groups or academia can actually address that. That's a larger issue, which we all know what it is. So I wouldn't want to dwell too much on that. Now, what we are talking of is we are not looking at phasing out coal, or we're looking at phasing out coal over a period of time. You're not looking at immediate shift. You're not looking at a short-term shift. You're looking at a long-term shift. You're looking at a shift till 2050. So my sense that I get is that if you actually look at all the coal-fired power plants, and if you actually do all the fossil fuel power plants, and if you actually categorize them on the basis of vintage, right? A lot of these, if you look at the total installed capacity in the region, will be about 350 odd gigawatts, out of the 205 gigawatts in India alone. Now, if you actually say that all plants older than 25 years need to be retired, right? A lot of these power plants automatically will be shut down, right? So, or would be good candidates for retirement. So when you're looking at job loss and livelihood issues, you are not looking at an immediate shift. You're looking at a shift over a period of time, and you need to. I agree. You need to have a lot of skill building and reskilling that needs to happen. And this is where I brought in this whole thing like capacity building and training and so on and so forth, which is not only meant for discount. Maybe I should have elaborated on that, but also looking at skill and reskilling, sharing of experiences, how, a lot of states in India, for example, Karnataka, which was coal heavy at one point of time, is now RE heavy, and how have they made this shift, and how have they rehabilitated the workforce. Now, on this whole issue of dams, I completely agree with what Dr. Mirza was saying. Dams or large hydro has its own issue. PR issues of flooding. We have a whole lot of issues on dams. And that's the reason why I think, while I agree that right now, if you look at base load, look at all the issues, dams would perhaps, or hydroelectricity would perhaps be a low-hanging fruit. I would say that that may not be the immediate future, because we have also done a lot of analysis on the Indo-Bhutan, and it's available on our website. We did this Indo-Bhutan critical analysis of the Indo-Bhutan energy cooperation, particularly the large dams, and we also interviewed a whole lot of Bhutanese on this while doing the study. And there are a whole lot of issues just pursuing on a hydroelectric pathway. Now, again, that then brings out to a question that one of the attendees asked on the baseload issue. Yes, baseload will be an issue because of the intermittency of renewables, but then that's where I strongly believe that the region should come together on storage technologies. Again, yes, we also have large hydroelectricity that's already there. Can we look at pump storage? There's a huge potential for pump storage. Not all of them are run-of-the-river plants. A lot of them are also large reservoirs. Can you look at pump storage? Can you also look at hydrogen technologies? So, yes, there is a fair amount of political ill will, particularly between a couple of countries, and of course, there's this dynamism that he's this one's friend and this country is that one's friend, and so on and so forth. So I think when it comes to climate, countries need to go beyond the issues that they have otherwise have, and we've seen that happening. If you look at the climate negotiations under the the whole G77 or the other groupings. You have all these countries coming together and actually these negotiators talking and coming up with common positions. So why can't this happen with energy too? I'll stop here for now. I'm not sure. My apologies if I've not answered all the questions, but
yes, certainly, sir. Thank you so much for taking those questions. And also, you have also responded to the question by Praharsh Patel. So I would like to ask this question, especially to Dr. Mirza, since you have mentioned that you have done a lot of field work in the eastern part of the subcontinent. There are definitely political hurdles, but apart from that, to overcome those political hurdles, we need to have a consensus, which Udisha was talking about, the domestic consensus. So what are the major impediments in both in fact the region as a whole that make it difficult for the energy exports of one country to gain access to into the other country? For example, India and Bangladesh, or India and Nepal. If you could take that. Yes, yes, sure.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehta. In terms of epistemic communities in South Asia, there isn't much of a difficulty in getting the experts to talk to each other. Especially in the last 7 years, there has been a plethora of training programs through the the USA program, through BIMSTEC. So the experts in South Asia regularly get together and interact, and they undertake training programs. I mean, very recently, ANU hosted the energy experts from all over South Asia for a course on renewable energy. So there isn't much barriers for the experts to interact with each other, but I will say that there is issues in terms of the experts trying to get their message across to the politicians. So one of the experts that I interviewed in Nepal told me that as an economist, he finds it really difficult to explain to politicians about the long-term benefits of energy cooperation, because politicians think about in terms of election cycles. So their main objective is to win the next election. They're not thinking 10 years down the track. As Professor Krishnaswamy mentioned, by 2050, we want to achieve net zero target. So their objective is not to think along the long term. So there's that basic discrepancy between what the experts want and what the politicians aim to achieve. Secondly, there are issues regarding continuation of certain policies. So when you have changes in government, you may not necessarily follow through on the agreements made by the previous political party. And of course, there are issues regarding resource nationalism. Many politicians will often revert to resource nationalism to garner votes. So they would use terms like, so-and-so neighboring country is going to steal our hydroelectricity and so on and so forth, which obviously creates a lot of negativity when it comes to public perceptions of not only neighbors, but also regional cooperation as a whole. And lastly, there are these stakeholders, which one of the people that I mentioned call them as negative stakeholders. So negative stakeholders are people who actually benefit from the lack of energy cooperation. So they benefit from the continuation of discord between certain powerful countries in South Asia and beyond South Asia. So, as long as you have certain negative stakeholders holding on to powerful positions in South Asia, regional cooperation is always going to be a stop-and-go process. And of course, as I mentioned, there are environmental issues in regards to hydroelectricity. And there is also issues in regard to vested interests in fossil fuels. So there are very close cooperation and overlapping of political interests and coal interests in certain parts of South Asia, which will prevent the development of regional cooperation.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Mirza. Professor Scott, there's a question for you by Lisa Adam, who I think when you had you mentioned about China, she's asking whether China cannot be a model of renewable energy. Can it be? It is undergoing an energy crisis itself. Plus, it's 90 billion cubic cc of water hanging over India in terms of huge dams is an impending apocalypse. What's the way out? So I think the resource nationalism thing, which Dr. Mirza just mentioned, it could be applied in the Indian side of the border, especially when this is going to come through. What your views, sir?
Yes, thank you. That's an interesting question. I hope my remarks weren't construed as saying everybody has to follow China's model. That wasn't my intent. And I agree with you that there are deep problems in China's own transition. In fact, their energy growth rates are such that even with the adoption of renewables, they're continuing to build fossil fuel, mostly coal-fired power plants. My point was that the examples in China, particularly with small hydropower adoption in Yunnan to the east, bear some examination. There's a maturity of work on both the technical and also the local impacts side. And to simply say that the border of South Asia region is bounded by this line and any interest group outside is sort of external to the discussions, I think is missing an opportunity. On the point of large dam storage on upstream rivers and particularly hydropower development with large reservoir storage on Sangpo, Brahmaputra, I think is of course a point for major both political concern, but also disaster risk. Potential of dam failure and ensuing downstream floods and damages. So your point is well taken. I was not intending to construe China as the model that everybody or that South Asia region should follow. Simply that this is a compelling both source of technical innovation and also something that South Asia stakeholders should be intent on learning lessons from. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Udisha, if I could come to you, how you mentioned the whole technocrats versus bureaucrats model, and then you spoke about the domestic consensus, the need for domestic consensus. How do you actually envision the importance of continued focus on effective policy negotiations, which also takes into account the civil society aspirations and also the expertise, which Mr. Krishnaswamy was also referring to? Because you have the expertise on one side, and then you have the decision makers on the other side who are purely guided by political considerations. So your views on that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So one of the trends that has been seen in the case of South Asia now as compared to, say, the 1990s, and I say this particularly in reference to dams, but I think that's the case for energy cooperation in general, that there are an increasing number of what one could call knowledge brokering institutions, or sort of that come up with new research as well as evidence to they act as sources of policy advice to governments in South Asia. I see it as a positive sign. I feel like there is definitely a dearth of scientific evidence as far as policy making is concerned. Up until the 1990s, we used to see an increasing, a huge influence of Western donor institutions, as well as development banks from the north, that used to play a huge role in advising governments on what kind of policies need to be constructed. While these institutions, which would be called traditional donors, while they continue to play a role, at least in the Himalayas, you will see that there are increasing number of local as well as regional institutions, one of them being ICMOD, that was mentioned by Dr. Scott, that does play a very important role in working with national governments, and they also work with local communities because of because their research requires them to go out there, collect data from the ground. So I think increasingly, of course, there's a long way to go, but in some sense, it can be said that because of the existence of such institutions in place, there is some hope that that views from local communities and from scholars are being slowly integrated in the policy making cycle. I think that's a very advanced sign. That is something that we need to encourage more. This gap that we've had between high level diplomacy and people with their own perspectives, civil society actors, scholars and journalists, they kind of functioned in their own sphere, and then there was the governance. But I think the fact that these institutions are emerging to bridge the gap, that's a great sign. So just to give you an example, I remember in 2019 I was in Nepal, and at the Power Summit, which was hosted by the Nepali private sector to kind of invite all these different stakeholders to Nepal, invite a lot of investors and try and encourage them to invest in Nepal's energy sector. Regional institutions did play an important role in bringing in the evidence that was required to back the claims that energy cooperation is needed. So I think these institutions will increasingly play an important role, and the fact that they're embedded within the local and the regional polities means that there is a certain amount of legitimacy that they have that external institutions might not have. So that needs to be taken into account, and I think that is how we are going to move ahead as far as consensus is concerned.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that intervention. So I would ask Mr. Krishnaswamy this question. So you mentioned about collectively the South Asian countries can do 100% RE. Would it be possible to achieve this at an individual scale? I mean, at a country level, or would this necessitate an inter-country cooperation? I mean, I am more wishing and hoping that it would be an inter-country collaboration. But what do you have to say about it?
My take is this, that maybe individually countries can, I mean, assuming that you broad-base the definition of renewables to include large hydro, I presume that countries could do it on their own. But then it is not whether they can do it on their own or not. It is what is the time frame or time horizon for doing so. If you do it collectively, you could possibly do it at a shorter time frame. And if you do it individually, it might take longer. But largely because, I mean, there are intermittency issues. Even with hydro, there would be intermittency issues. So it's not that hydro can generate power all through the year. So they may have to, because of the seasonal variation and with the climate change, a whole lot of other issues, So the question then comes is that if we are able to do this balancing across the region, then it might happen sooner. It's not that countries can't, at least decarbonizing the power sector or the energy sector could be done independently in each of these countries. It might take a longer period of time.
Right, sir, right. So as a follow-up to this question, there is a question by Siddharth Arora who asks that one of the major challenge in renewables is the financial backing of the project, in contrast to thermal plants where the returns and profitability is achieved in a shorter time as compared to the renewables, specifically in the hydro projects. What can be done to incentivize more investment into renewables, such as the hydro energy in India? I think this is very important here.
That's not really true, right? Now, if you actually look at okay, so let's sort of make it more a data-driven answer to it. Now, if you look at costs, right? Cost per kilowatt hour. Solar was 10 rupees in the early 2000. When the National Solar Mission was set up, it was about 10, 12. I think it was earlier, it was even 18 rupees a kilowatt hour. It's now come to 1 rupee 99 paisa. Okay. If you actually look at coal, coal was in the region of 2 rupees a kilowatt hour. It's now actually gone to 3.50. So if you actually put it in perspective, the new coal is costlier than the new solar. The old solar is costlier than the old coal. Okay. But I hope it's not confusing. So the new coal is costlier than the new solar. The new coal is costlier than wind. Now, if you do solar or wind with storage, it is slightly more expensive than coal, but that is also going to be addressed, and the storage price is also coming down. Now, in India, for renewables, you have what is called as a must-run status. So which means that any electricity that is generated, renewable energy that is generated, will have to be evacuated. So your what is called as curtailment is reduced, is very minimum for renewables. Now, if you look at coal, what is called as a plant load factor, which is how many days the coal-fired power plant runs and operates and how many hours does it operate, you find that earlier, it used to operate at a PLF about 70-80%, and now today the average of PLF is about 50%. So what is actually happening is a lot of these coal-fired power plants are operating at below optimal levels, and when they operate at below optimal levels, their profitability also reduces. And if you actually look at the parliamentary question that was raised a couple of years back, there are a whole lot of coal-fired power plants that are actually getting into the category of stranded assets, which means that they are actually making loss.
That's interesting. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So yes, I would now move to the end or to conclude towards the program. I would invite each of the panelists' views on how do we actually create an open, efficient, rules-based, transparent energy markets, and also wherein all the countries in the subcontinent are actually collaborating with one another for what is the overall aim? The aim is energy security for whom? For the people, right? So that has to be available, affordable, and accessible. So what do you think? And also, if any one of you could also throw some light on the waste management of solar power. You know, we are having so many, we are having the International Solar Alliance, and the focus is on solar energy. But then 25 years, 30 years down the line, we are going to have so many solar panels just lying waste because their half-life or full time is like 25, 30 years. So what are we going to do with that? Isn't it going to create another set of challenges in terms of management of waste, solar waste? So if you could throw some light on that as well, and then we could conclude. So your views on the way forward. I would start with Dr. Mirza.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehta. In terms of moving forward, I guess if you look back in the last 7 years, there has been many firsts in South Asia. You know, we had the very first India-Bangladesh cross-border transmission line. You had the very first, regional pipeline between India and Nepal, the Friendship Pipeline. And for the very first time, the Ministry of Power in India actually changed its guidelines to allow trilateral cooperation before it only allowed bilateral cooperation. So there has been, significant progress in energy cooperation. But I guess what would really, make energy cooperation sustainable in South Asia is to agree on some form of social and environmental standards of the implementation of these projects, because these projects are bound to have huge costs on the most vulnerable sectors of our economy, as Udisha mentioned. As Professor Krishnaswamy mentioned, South Asia is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world, one of the vulnerable regions in the world when it comes to climate change. So I think it's very important to identify certain standards. They don't necessarily have to be a copy and paste, a cookie cutter approach when it comes to international standards. It should have some kind of regional ownership. But of course, they can be informed by IFC standards and other international standards, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. But I think agreeing to some form of standards will really help us move forward in envisioning how regional cooperation actually facilitates sustainable development and not just the interests of elites per se. In terms of the question you asked regarding electronic waste of solar panels, this is also something that needs to be perhaps led by India, and perhaps India can bring together the other countries of South Asia on finding ways to deal with electronic waste. I guess it could very much be a part of the energy transition process. As we know, some of the critical materials required for solar panels and wind turbines are very difficult to mine and are also controlled mostly by China and to some extent Russia. So in that context, the recycling of some of these rare earth minerals becomes very important. So I think solar panels and the recycling of these panels, or perhaps even disposing of them in a sustainable manner, should be perceived or conceived within the whole energy transition process moving forward. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Mirza. Professor Scott, over to you.
Yes, in sum, I think the group should consider carefully at least two pathways leading forward, or along the pathway leading forward, two major concerns. One I have is the notion that we assume that climate change is fixed and given, and that we understand very well what the impacts are, both in terms of the 1.5C future, but also what the implications are for infrastructure in the region to meet those kinds of targets. I don't think we have done an adequate job on that. So looking at, and we'll see what the COP26 results actually bring forward, but the different AR6 working groups, I think, have actually done a good job in doing that. I have contributed in small ways in two of those chapters. But to really think through more carefully climate change, not simply as the driver that changes that or sets that future set of targets, but what are, along the way, what are the impacts that we're likely to expect? And I think from the hydropower side, that is the change in the whole hydroclimatic regime that would actually lead to the ability of hydropower to continue to meet future needs, or not, and less so. So then that baseload question came in. also choice of technology and so forth, I think are important points to consider. The second one, and maybe I'm reading too much into your remarks, Dr. Mehta, that you said that what is it that we need to get to for an open free marketplace and so forth. Let's be careful of market-only solutions. I think this will have to be a very heavily regulated type of market. Internally, we obviously have the energy regulators, but I think we are also going to need a South Asia regulatory body with all of the political economy implications that will have. This goes to Dr. Mirza's point also about standards. So in my view, it's not only the environmental and the social standards, which I fully agree with, but I think it's also market mechanisms, standards for looking at regional integration. And then the final point is, I think that some of the multilaterals and even the external to the region, and this is partly my remark on China earlier, though it was more in the guise of sort of the technology, understanding well what the technology and adoption type of examples are. And again, not from any model perspective as, this is an ideal, but what are the lessons learned from adopters who've had more mature sets of experiences over longer periods of time? But I do think that, and this is again, it's the COP26, at least the next point in it being in Glasgow, is to really try to understand how international multilateral bodies, including on the finance side, multilateral banks and others, but also the rising consensus around global solutions and global finance and global mechanisms to move forward along the path. So those are my short remarks in this. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join the panel.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, Udisha, over to you.
Yeah, so I think these are all great points. And the one point that I would like to sort of mention here, I think is the role of institutions, stronger institutions for sure. So just as we know that I mentioned it in my remarks that there is a SAARC energy center in place, but what exactly are the national focal points if one particular country wants to engage in a cooperation mechanism with the other one? Do we have these systems in place? Are these processes in place? And right now it seems to me like that is not the case, which also leads me to the other point that we need to make sure that there is data transparency. As somebody who is researching the energy sector in this region, I can tell you that finding data on demand and supply availability of different countries is a huge challenge. The data is often not updated. The most recent data available at times is 2012, 2011, and then projections are made based on that. Even in that case, data is not reliable. There's a lot of confusion about potential, about theoretical potential of hydropower and how much should actually be tapped, should be tapped into. So I think data becomes extremely important, and governments have to work towards ensuring that there is the transparency in place, because in the absence of it, what it does is that it creates a lot of doubt and suspicion. Projects are signed and they are implemented without people fully understanding the basis on which these things are taking place. The other thing that I wanted to say is, I think there's also a need for us to move towards some kind of harmonization of domestic and regional energy trade policy. There is no doubt that with India already bringing in energy from Bhutan, and now with the Arun 3 soon to be completed, exporting power to India, but governments are still in that phase where the conversation around the policy framework has still not been finalized. Geopolitics often gets in the way, and we have to make sure that we have both the processes taking place together. I feel like Nepal has taken large strides. For instance, it has come up with new institutions to ensure that there is more regulation in place, but even my fieldwork shows that there is quite a lot of confusion between departments and ministries about who is responsible for what. So I feel like the pace at which things are happening is quite fast, and countries have to find a way to keep up with it, so that we don't have a situation where projects are implemented and we are ready to go, but we don't have the norms and the standards and the regulations which will make sure that this cooperation takes place in the right manner.
Absolutely, that's very true. Thank you. Yes, so I would now invite Mr. Srinivas for his concluding remarks.
So I actually got 2 points. One, I did mention about the LMDC in the chat. There is already a like-minded developing country grouping which has these countries, many of these countries as members. And we do, as part of the LMDC, they do negotiate at the climate meetings as a grouping and have common stance. So can that thinking also go into addressing climate change as a collective in the region, which then sings all the other differences that we have between countries, but actually look at energy cooperation as something more overarching. I know it's easier said than done, but nevertheless, can that be one of the thought? Second is I completely agree with what Dr. Sadaqat said. I think we should be very careful to ensure that the environmental and social issues are not forgotten. Yes, again, it's very easy to say large-scale renewables, 100% renewables, and so on, which all of us are in, which many of us are in favor of. But having said that, we should also take cognizance of the fact that solar does require a huge amount of land. For every megawatt of solar, you require 4 acres of land. And if you only go in for ground-mounted, large utility-scale solar projects, then we'll be there'll be a huge amount of land grabbing. So one will have to, and which will then impinge on environmental and social issues. So one will have to be very careful. So when we're looking at 100% renewables, one will have to ensure that what kind of land, what kind of a regulatory structure that you have, not just, and I completely agree with Dr. Scott that you need to have a regional energy regulator, perhaps, who can bring in all together all of these issues. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone. I am so grateful. This discussion today has actually been very enriching and fascinating. And I think this whole topic of energy cooperation in South Asia is extremely significant. And it requires continuous brainstorming and conversations like this. And because our mandate at IMPRI is also to ideate and inform policy, so the outputs of such exercises would be very key in efficient
I think is the panel we're on, but we've lost IMPRI.
Yeah, that's right.
We're not able to hear you, Simi.
Dr. Kumar, are you with us? We see your icon there, your image. We've lost Simi, but Arjun Kumar, are you there? Well, all of you, it's been a pleasure to meet you and learn about your interesting work. And I have been enlightened this morning, so thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Keep in touch. Bye.